I'm Scott Alan Miller. This is my life living in Leon, Nicaragua. We are having a discussion, as we often do, on the Expats of Nicaragua WhatsApp group. We were talking about trying to offset giving up a job in the country that you're coming from, Canada in this particular example, and trying to start a company, starting a business where you can work for yourself here in Nicaragua in order to offset that loss of a job, basically replacing a foreign job with a local one. And that doesn't actually work. We need to explain why, because this is a very important concept that is extremely hard to grasp if you've never really looked at international economics. So we're going to look at why you, for all intents and purposes, cannot replace your job that you're working, where you're getting a salary somewhere else, with starting a business here in Nicaragua. We'll go into that in depth right after the bump. We'll start with the very dangerous caveat, which is it's not actually impossible to invest heavily in Nicaragua and pull a reasonable amount of salary out of the job. It is just absolutely never going to happen to you, so don't take the fact that it's physically possible to mean, and I know, right now I just lost everyone. Every single person is going to go, well, nope, he said it can't happen to me, but I know I'm the exception. And that makes you not the exception. Every time. So now later, when you do this and you tell me, Scott, I thought I was the exception, I will point to this video and say, in the moment that I said you can't be the exception, you completely defied what I said. You listened to part of it and you ignored the rest, right? Every person, same scenario, right? That's the thing. Everyone does the exact same thing. It's so by the book, and every person thinks they're doing something unique every time. But I want to run into this numbers and give you a real idea, right? Okay, so when we're talking about businesses that expats can reasonably start. Now, if you've lived here for 20 years, things get different, right? Yeah, you live here for a really long time and you have good sources of income and you know the market really well. Things will eventually start to change, and in time, you could come up with business ideas, not run a business for a long time and eventually have it get good. You could eventually come up with ways to approach business in a unique way that you have a special offering and make a difference. But if you are just arriving, or if you have not yet arrived, you don't have any resources to discuss business in a new market. It's true anywhere in the world, right? You can't predict what is going to be good somewhere else if you don't know that market. You have to get to a place and know that market first. It's just part of basic business, right? But somehow coming to Nicaragua, people are sure that they don't need to do that basic due diligence in business, and that's part of the danger. But ignoring all of that, let's talk about what we consider success. Okay, so let's talk about normal businesses. Let's say a restaurant or a hotel or a pulperia or a small corner store, a mini mart, you name it, a barbershop, whatever. Come up with the type of business that you're thinking about. And now I want you to picture a Nicaraguan who owns and runs that business. So when we're talking about big investors, we're talking about something different, right? Let's say you bring in $1 million, you're investing in Nicaragua, and you're opening tons of businesses with that, or a giant factory with, I guess it wouldn't be a giant factory, but a real factory with $1 million, right? We're talking about something different. You're an investor and you're looking for dividends, and that's still going to be a challenge. That is a very hard thing, but it's a different thing. We're talking about a situation where you're trying to keep working. You're not trying to be a millionaire. You're not trying to get out from working. You're not trying to work less. You're just trying to leave wherever you are and come work in paradise. And that's admirable. That's a great thing to want to do. That's fantastic. But you're going to be in this mental place where you're like, well, if I was in my home country and I started a business, the same type of business, whatever it is, I could reasonably expect that I could work in my business and pay myself. Not a lot, just a reasonable salary, and be happy. And then if I made some profits, just a little bit, that'd be fantastic, right? That's success, right? But if I just replace my day job with working for myself, doing the same job I would normally do, right? Let's just say that you're a chef in a small restaurant, diner, right? Let's take something very basic, right? So you run a little small town diner or even a big city diner in America or Canada, and you work in the kitchen and you're the head chef and you do all the ordering and the stuff, and you own the place. You could pay yourself a reasonable salary as the head chef. You're still not like a chef, right? Not to be little diner chefs, but we know we're talking about a cook, right? The master cook, the head cook, plus the person doing the ordering, plus the person scheduling the shifts, plus the person cleaning up afterwards, whatever, right? And you do have staff. I'm not saying you're the only person. You could pay yourself a very reasonable salary and say, okay, I own the place, I work for myself, that's nice. and I'm pulling in enough money that I'm happy. I can have a nice house. I can live a nice life. I can do all the things I want to do. Fantastic. Right? Now, in your home country, right, you've figured out that you can do that. So the first question is, did you do that? Right? Most people who want to do this in Nicaragua have not successfully done it somewhere else. So that's a starting point of, I'm going to not have a track record of doing this and try to do it in Nicaragua. But let's assume you have done it, that you have that track record. Okay, so you're happy doing it there, and you had to pull X amount of salary for yourself to be happy. Let's just say it's $5,000 a month, okay? Which might be high for some of you. Actually living in the US, that would be very low. So now, but you can live on that for sure, or you could when I lived there, and that's a reasonable amount to pay yourself working in your own restaurant. And if you work for no one and you don't answer to anybody, all you answer to is your customers, that's really nice. If you can pull a reliable $5,000 a month, maybe you make an extra $5,000 per year in profit. You have this little bit of extra buffer. You don't have any stress of answering to a boss. You get to set your own hours. Everybody works for you. You're creating jobs. You have the pride of owning a place. It's fantastic, right? This could make you very happy. And then you're like, I'm going to move to Nicaragua and do the same thing. I want to give up on the tax burdens of the place that I'm coming from. I want to give up on the rat race. I want to move to a tropical paradise and do things. So let's talk about a bunch of things that happen there. One, anyone else who's like you is also willing to do the same thing and earn less money. So you're immediately up against a completely different level of competition. If you think there's competition in Canada or the US, you have no idea what competition is like. When you're looking to move to the tropics, to some tropical paradise location, assume your competition is going to go up by tenfold at least. Even though you get there and you say, there aren't that many restaurants, there aren't that many, the competition per customer is through the roof. You will never discover a tropical paradise location that no one else knows about. If there is an empty spot for any type of business to fill in a gap that's a normal gap, a desirable gap, like a restaurant or a hotel or something fun or something obvious, there is someone who lives there who has already thought of filling it in, and there is an expat from somewhere who has thought about filling in, who has been there longer than you. That will always be the case, right? There's just always someone. Now, if you stay somewhere for 20 years, 30 years, you could eventually become that person, but you gotta just happen to be in the right place. The right place happens to close down. There happens to be a gap and you jump on it before anyone else can. That's how it works. There isn't any like big worldwide shortage of luxury businesses where you get to work in paradise and earn a nice living without having like it be just awful, right? Or without tons of competition or whatever. That doesn't exist. That is like disparity in foreign exchange. Sure, it can happen for a millisecond, but all the computers will identify that the money is off by a tiny amount and it'll level out in milliseconds because there's a mad rush to fill those gaps, right? There's always someone. If you can identify a spot like that, any one of us will move into it just like that because it's a miracle to be able to hit that jackpot. So it's not going to happen. So now you're looking at moving into Nicaragua. You're going to do the same business. So you had that diner in the US, you're getting paid $5,000 a month. And as an owner, you are happy. Now you come to Nicaragua and there's a Nicaraguan diner and they're doing the same thing, right? Same basic food. Of course, it changes a little bit. Same basic layout. Of course, it changes a little bit. Lower cost of buying the property, lower cost of employees and all that. You think, wow, that's all fantastic. But you forget that the amount you can charge for a meal is far less and the number of meals you're going to sell is far less. So that makes it quite difficult. And if you're in a situation where those things aren't true, then your cost of real estate will go up or whatever to accommodate. So now what you're up against is that there are owners of those diners here in Nicaragua that are happily doing the same basic business, but bringing in $500 a month instead of $5,000. So you have to ask yourself, if you're going to come and run a diner, work the diner, and be successful in Nicaragua, are you going to be happy bringing in $500 a month? Because that's what a successful owner-operator of a diner would look like here in Nicaragua. Now, if you're wildly successful, you might get a little bit higher. Maybe you're going to get up to 800, 900, but at some point you're going to be bringing in so much that you can't really make any more by being the cook in a restaurant. Maybe you can make more by being an investor in more restaurants, but that's a completely different thing. If you're trying to pay yourself, you can reasonably only pay yourself without going insane, with all kinds of weird business things happening, about what the market value is. So a cook in a diner in the United States might earn minimum wage and might earn up to, maybe in some amazing, like crazy wild world, $10,000 a month. But realistically, it's much more likely between $3,000 and $7,000 a month. And even $7,000 a month is really pushing it, right? And that's as the person who answers to nobody and has to do tons and tons of work and has all kinds of responsibility. You're really pushing it. To take those same numbers and move them into Nicaragua, there are people who are running restaurants and are happy to bring home $100 a month, maybe not happy, but willing to go to work and keep doing it for bringing home $100 a month because they're the owner, right? And then you have people who may, in extreme circumstances, for a similar role, be being paid $700 or $800 a month because they work in the business, they run the business, they're wildly successful, and they're able to pay themselves that kind of salary. That's about the range. So you have to ask yourself, if you were willing to be in that role in a foreign position, are you willing to make a tenth the money to do it in Nicaragua? Because that's the real number that we're talking about. We're really talking between, realistically, if you did this, you'd be lucky if you could pay yourself those numbers. That would be considered a successful position like that, whether it's running a hotel or running a restaurant or whatever. Maybe some bigger hotels like a resort, if you're really running things, maybe 1,000, right? So you have to take those numbers and think of it in that context. Most people, when they're thinking, well, I'm gonna open up a restaurant here and I'm gonna compete against the very similar restaurant down the beach, right, or down the street or in the next town, and I'm going to work in the kitchen, maybe even serve the food, maybe do all the positions, which may run you into other problems, but let's just assume you do. And you're going to work really hard. You're going to put in blood equity, it's not what I meant, sweat equity, blood, sweat, and tears is what I was thinking, sweat equity into the business. And you think, well, maybe I'm not going to make as much as I would back home, where I was hoping I'd be decently successful and bring home $5,000 with no profits, no losses, but no profits, $5,000 a month, making $60K a year. If I move to Nicaragua, I'm going to have lower cost of living, and I'm hoping to pay myself enough to make maybe half that, $3,000 a month. And that sounds reasonable when you're in the US or Canada. Well, I'm going to make $3,000 a month down in Nicaragua. It'll be easy, right? And then you come to Nicaragua and realize that the entire market is full of restaurants or hotels or whatever business you're thinking of, where the owner who works in it is paying themselves far under $1,000 and is happy to do so because they're making 2 or 3 times minimum wage, which is just over $200, right? You could be at triple minimum wage and not yet bring in $1,000 a month if you find that there's so much business that you're able to run your own business and pay yourself over $1,000 a month. Automatically, another Nicaraguan, and very likely another expat, will be willing to step in and start up a competitor business overnight, because it means you have an undersaturated market. You have a market with excess customers who are willing to pay more. So someone else is willing to step in and charge less, or work more hours, or work different hours, or simply siphon off some of your customers because you're busy, or they're going to have a better location or whatever, because they're perfectly happy to work at $500 a month. Does that make sense? Because a successful owner-operator is happy at, we'll say $600 a month. I think at that number, you'd have people who are pretty darn happy. You will never have a shortage of Nicaraguans, and very rarely have a shortage of expats who are willing to start up and run businesses at those numbers. That's the problem of defined success, right? That is, but what if I run a successful restaurant? Yes, if you run what Nicaragua considers a successful business of that nature, this is how much you can reasonably pay yourself as a worker in your own business. This is how much you can earn working here. You can't earn more than that. Anything above that has to come from profits, and that gets you into, now you need to start explaining how your business is going to make profits. So the challenge that we have is that most people are either paying themselves a salary, an appropriate salary, and then claiming that that's profits, which that is not. They're actually working for that money. So that doesn't make sense. And then not making money from profits, which we'll discuss in a second. Or they're taking money as profits and actually showing a profit for the business, but doing so by not paying themselves. In almost all cases, and I truly mean almost all cases, we're talking about businesses that are either stealing from, and this is for themselves, for their own records, stealing from their potential profits to make it look like they're getting paid a salary, or stealing from their salary to make it look like they're making a profit, but they're working without doing both. And so here's the risk. When you invest in a business, you expect to get a certain return, right? 9% or better. If you're getting less than that, then you have a problem. So that's considered a loss. Anything below a 9% gain is considered a loss because 9% is the number that you can get anywhere. So if you're investing in the business and you want to call 9% that you're able to bring in a break even and you're able to pay yourself a salary, then you would be able to define yourself as having an investment that is not earning profit but not losing, and you're able to pay yourself a salary. That would be adequate, but not very impressive. Not really what you're looking for. But if the only thing you care about is protecting your money and being able to work for yourself where you want to work, then that would be fine. That would be successful within a reasonable level. Anything above 9% would then be you're paying yourself a salary and you have a profitable business. Perfect. Now you have a good situation, even if it's just a little bit, right? Now, if your number falls below that, you need to adjust to be able to understand the numbers. Anything less, if you're either not paying yourself a market wage or you're not making a break even with your investments, you are stealing from one and making the other look better by shifting the money around, which is all completely legal and fine. But when we're talking about having a successful business, we must be able to have the cumulative of the two be reasonable. Because if I work for someone else and invest, so if I take my money, let's say I have $100,000 and I invest it in an index fund, I'm going to make that 9%. And then I can go work for someone and pull a salary and earn whatever my salary is. So if I'm going to convert that $100,000 and not invest it in somewhere else, I'm going to invest it in my own business, I need to pull that same 9%, or else I'm donating to the business. Right? To be clear, that's why this number is so important. This is the number I can get with no effort and not taking the risk of having my own business. In theory, people are willing not to do that and go into their own business, invest in their own business, because they think that they can pull higher than 9%. And a successful business, by definition, does. And there are businesses that will pull 15 or 20% within reason, and wildly successful ones that, of course, can pull hundreds of percentages. But those are very, very rare, right? There's no real expectation of that. But being able to pull quite a bit more than 9% is actually generally reasonable in most cases, especially when you're in markets that are a bit more flexible. So when we're doing this, when we're considering these things, you have to consider these factors. Most people will only look, even when you're analyzing this for yourself, you'll only look at one factor. Well, I'm able to pull a salary. Okay, but you're giving up your investments to pay that salary, or you're working and pulling the investment money, and then it's like, well, but you're working for free, and so that investment income is really just your salary being paid through a different mechanism. And if you've never worked in business, we don't expect people to be used to these things. You're not used to looking at these numbers. You're not used to defining what a baseline looks like. And that's where it's super difficult. And then, of course, on top of that, we have this problem that in Nicaragua, getting that 9% return is very difficult. It's just a difficult market. And of course, paying a salary that you'd be happy with is also difficult, right? So if I'm looking at this from a salary perspective, if I'm working a job here, maybe I have a lot of skills, I speak English, maybe I'm worth $1,000 a month here in the Nicaraguan market. That's within reason. But if I was to work outside of Nicaragua, if I was to work for a U.S. company remotely, a Canadian company remotely, a European company remotely, I could work in one of my specialty fields. And even as a part-time remote worker, I'm worth at least $4,000 or $5,000 a month, if not $10,000 or $20,000 a month. That would be really extreme. But those are possible numbers, right? So we're looking at 4 to 5 times. Even if it was just a real special case, very little time, very unskilled work, I may pull 2 or 3 times the Nicaraguan market working abroad for somewhere else, and then have the tax advantages of bringing it in. Remember, if you make the money here in Nicaragua, you're paying income tax here. But if you make the money somewhere else, you may have to pay tax there. That's a separate thing, but you don't have to pay it here. And if you're an American, then you don't have to pay it until you get to big numbers. And so these are really important things to understand, that when you're looking at investing in a business, right, you have to understand, how is your investment in creating that business going to be justified, and how is it going to create a salary that is going to be justified? And for most people, almost all, not quite as much as the last time, but something like 90 to 95% of people will pay themselves something and try to take profits and find that their profits are below 9%, often below 0, right? They're often negative, but almost always below 9%. So they're losing their investment, and they're also not paying themselves an adequate salary to be considered good enough as a salary. And so are often losing in both areas But if it's above 0 and below 9, they'll often portray that as profit, which it is on paper. It's taxable profit, but it's not actual profit. And if they're getting a salary, they may be paying taxes. And so they're like, yes, I'm getting paid, but they're not getting paid market value, and they're certainly not being paid their value if they were to work somewhere else. And when you put it all together, basically you're taking your savings and you're taking your labor and you're donating them. And yes, you may be getting something for them, but you're getting a fraction of what they're worth. And so everything beyond that, maybe you're bringing in 50% of their value, maybe you're bringing in 20% of their value. Everything beyond that, you're donating to yourself for the effort of trying to run this business thing on its own. And I know there's a lot of math there. I know there's a lot of business stuff there, but these are things that should be intrinsic if you are thinking about starting a business, especially in a new country. Remember, coming to a new country puts everything on expert level. If you didn't do this in Canada, if you don't have this stuff intrinsically in America, if you don't just know it off the top of your head, if I have to explain it, then we have a risk, because those things should be second nature in those markets. And when you come to Nicaragua, you should already know everything that you could have done there will be so much harder here, both because it's a harder market and because you are not so knowledgeable about it. You're a foreigner, you don't have the resources. There's just every single aspect of this gets harder. If you were to move to, say, Switzerland, you would have a bunch of deficits because you don't know the market, you don't know, you don't have the local resources, but the market pays really well and there's a lot of opportunity. So it may balance itself out. But when you're coming to a place like Nicaragua, every single aspect that you're dealing with is putting this stuff on expert level, which we have a video where we talk about that. It's all expert level. You have to understand that, right? And so if you haven't done these things before, if you're not completely knowledgeable about these terms, that alone should be enough that you say, ooh, that means I can't do that here. It's fine if you want to invest. It's fine if Nicaragua is where you want to learn how to do business. I don't recommend that. I recommend you try somewhere else and then use those lessons to move forward in Nicaragua after you've learned them. But if you want to do that, that's fine. Make sure it's money you don't depend on, and make sure you're not trying to replace your salary. The whole idea here is replacing an existing salary that you have somewhere else with a salary here. And I'm trying to show just how impossible that is. Even if you need to earn far less, the amount that you're able to earn here is so much less, if anything, if not just losing money, that your risk is that you will invest heavily here into something that will lose money, and you will attrition out your nest egg, all while potentially not having an adequate salary, and just layer one loss upon another. But you might convince yourself you're not actually losing money, and over time have just less and less and less earning power without realizing it until it's too late. It takes most people quite a long time to put the numbers together and realize that they're not sustainably making money, right? Because the problem with all this is that your retirement will get smaller rather than larger. And in some cases, the raw number gets bigger. Well, I had 100,000 when I came. I have 105,000 now. Several years later, I grew. That is not growth. That is shrinkage. That 105 is worth less than the 100 that you started with. It's just, you have to account for inflation. You have to account for all these things. And so that's the danger, right? It's not just that you'll struggle to do well doing this. You will also struggle to be able to define whether or not you've done well until it's too late. And if you go out and ask other people who are in the same boat as you, but a little bit farther along the path, how it's going for them, so much of the time you will get good advice, right? And we'll be like, don't do this, that you're going to lose money. But a significant portion of the time, people will say, no, I'm doing it and I'm doing fine. And they never break down those numbers for you or themselves. So you don't know what they mean by doing fine. And often they don't know what they mean by doing fine. And if you actually knew the numbers they were getting, if you knew how hard they were working and how much they were earning, how little they were earning, or possibly how much they were paying to be able to work, you might say, oh, that's not viable. And often one of the reasons that this comes up is that you're often dealing with people who have saved up over a lifetime. They are now retired or semi-retired, and they are burning their retirement, and they're seeing the business as a way to keep themselves busy. They may be seeing it as a value because it keeps them from going out and spending money. It keeps them from just being idle, and maybe it earns some amount of money doing something that they love, which is important, and they see it as a hobby. And if they want to bring in $4,000 a month, but they are able to simply spend their retirement, and by running the business, yeah, they may only be making $1 an hour. They may not be actually getting a return on it. They may not care because they're burning through their resources during their retirement, and they're okay with that because it's something they enjoy doing. And so that they are paying for the privilege of being able to do that because it's fun for them, is completely fine. That's a great way to spend your retirement years, but you need to be aware that for them, success may easily be fully knowledgeably paying to work because they like the work. And you are looking to support yourself. And if you have to pay it from your own retirement to pay your own salary to live, and your retirement's going to go away because you're working, that's probably not what you're looking to do. That's a bad way to go. So you want to make sure that that is not what's happening. Thank you for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Allen Miller. As always, watch another episode, share on social media, tell someone about the show, and I will see all of you tomorrow.